The Galactic Zoological Reserve on Station Kepler 442b housed the most dangerous creatures from across 17 different star systems. Most species avoided working there entirely, considering it a death sentence wrapped in scientific research. The Zephyrians were too fragile, their crystalline bones shattering at the slightest impact. The Velcarians possessed incredible strength, but lacked the patience required for animal care. The aquatic nautiloids couldn't survive long outside their water suits. Only humans, with their bizarre combination of resilience, adaptability, and what other species called suicidal curiosity, seemed capable of handling the facility's most challenging residents. Sarah Chen had been working at the reserve for 3 standard years, longer than any previous keeper. Her colleagues from other species watched her with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment as she calmly entered enclosures that had claimed the lives of dozens of qualified xenobiologists. Where others saw death lurking behind every habitat barrier, Sarah saw puzzles waiting to be solved. The morning shift began like any other, with Sarah reviewing the overnight reports from the automated monitoring systems. The Crimson Stalkers from Arcturus Prime had attempted another escape, leaving deep gouges in their reinforced habitat walls. The Shadow Wraiths from the Void Nebula had successfully reproduced, requiring immediate separation of the offspring before they consumed each other. The Plasma Bears from Helios 7 had somehow figured out how to short-circuit their feeding mechanisms, leaving them without proper nutrition for 6 hours. But it was the final report that made Sarah pause. Habitat 47 had registered unprecedented activity levels throughout the night. The creature housed there was known simply as the Beast in the facility's records, though its official designation was Leonis xenomorphus. It had arrived 2 months ago from a derelict exploration vessel found drifting near the Andromeda Gateway. The ship's crew had vanished entirely, leaving behind only scattered remains and this single, magnificent predator. The beast resembled the ancient lions of Earth, but where terrestrial lions were golden and warm, this creature was composed of what appeared to be living obsidian. Its mane flickered with bioluminescent patterns that shifted like aurora across a night sky. Standing nearly 4 meters at the shoulder and stretching 8 meters from nose to tail, it possessed retractable claws that could slice through military-grade titanium. Its eyes held an intelligence that unnerved even the most experienced xenobiologists. No one had successfully approached the beast since its arrival. 3 Velcarian handlers had been hospitalized with severe lacerations during the initial containment procedures. A team of robotic maintenance units had been systematically destroyed when they attempted to clean the habitat. Even the automated feeding systems had been torn apart, forcing the staff to use long-range nutrient delivery drones that the beast regarded with obvious contempt. Sarah made her way through the facility's corridors, acknowledging the nervous greetings from her colleagues. Dr. Vexan, the station's chief xenobiologist and a member of the highly intelligent Cerebrary species, intercepted her near the central hub. Keeper Chen, his translated voice carried undertones of concern. "I must again advise against your proposed approach to the Leone specimen. The creature has shown no signs of socialization potential. Perhaps we should consider transferring it to a maximum security research facility." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face the tall, gray-skinned alien. His large black eyes held genuine worry, and she appreciated his concern. "Dr. Vexan, that creature has been isolated and confused for 2 months. It's showing classic signs of severe stress and depression. Look at the behavioral reports. It's not eating properly, it's not resting, and those bioluminescent patterns are becoming increasingly erratic, which is precisely why it's so dangerous," Dr. Vexan replied. "A stressed apex predator is unpredictable. Your species' tendency toward risk-taking behavior is well documented, but this borders on self-destructive." Sarah smiled, an expression that always seemed to unsettle her alien colleagues. "Dr. Humans didn't become the galaxy's primary animal handlers by playing it safe. We formed bonds with creatures that could kill us before we even developed interstellar travel. Sometimes the most dangerous animals just need someone willing to see past the fangs and claws." She continued toward Habitat 47, leaving Dr. Vexan shaking his elongated head in that universal gesture of disapproval that seemed to transcend species barriers. The corridor leading to the high-security enclosures was notably quieter, with fewer staff members and more automated security protocols. Warning signs in 17 different languages and symbol systems lined the walls, all carrying the same message: extreme danger, Authorized personnel only. The observation deck overlooking Habitat 47 was empty when Sarah arrived. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum barrier, she could see the beast lying motionless in the center of its enclosure. The habitat had been designed to mimic various planetary environments, with rocky outcroppings, artificial vegetation, and climate control systems that could simulate everything from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest. Currently, it was set to resemble the creature's presumed homeworld, based on analysis of the derelict ship's origin data. As Sarah watched, the beast's ears twitched slightly, acknowledging her presence despite its seemingly dormant state. Those remarkable eyes opened slowly, fixing on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The bioluminescent patterns in its mane shifted from deep purple to brilliant blue, creating a mesmerizing display against its dark fur. "Hello there." "Beautiful," Sarah whispered, pressing her palm against the barrier. "Having trouble sleeping?" The beast's massive head lifted, tilting slightly as if considering her words. For several moments they regarded each other across the divide of reinforced walls and species barriers. Then, to Sarah's amazement, the beast rose to its feet and padded closer to the observation window. Each step was fluid and graceful despite its enormous size, muscles rippling beneath its dark coat like shadows made solid. When it reached the barrier, the beast sat back on its haunches, bringing its eyes level with Sarah's. The bioluminescent patterns in its mane slowed their flickering, settling into a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm. Up close, Sarah could see details that the security footage had missed. Scars crisscrossed its muzzle and shoulders, evidence of battles fought in the depths of space. Its eyes held depths of intelligence and something else that made her heart ache with recognition. Loneliness. This magnificent creature wasn't just dangerous or stressed. It was profoundly, utterly alone. The last of its kind, trapped in an alien environment surrounded by beings it couldn't communicate with or understand. Sarah had seen that same look in the eyes of rescued animals back on Earth, creatures that had been abandoned or mistreated until they forgot how to trust. "You're not just a beast, are you?" she murmured, watching as the beast's ears perked forward at the sound of her voice. "You're a person, a someone, not a something." The creature's response was immediate and startling. It raised one massive paw and placed it against the barrier directly opposite Sarah's hand. The gesture was so deliberately mimetic that several nearby monitoring systems registered alarm spikes, interpreting the movement as a potential breach attempt. But Sarah knew better. This wasn't aggression or an escape attempt. This was the first real communication the beast had attempted since its arrival, a bridge across the gap between species, built from nothing more than mutual recognition of intelligence and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of trust. The next morning brought an emergency staff meeting that Sarah had been expecting. Word of her extended interaction with the beast had spread, through the facility's rumor networks faster than a plasma fire, through a ship's ventilation system. Dr. Vexon stood at the head of the conference table, his large eyes reflecting the holographic displays showing security footage from Habitat 47. "As you can observe," he announced to the assembled staff, Keeper Chen engaged in unauthorized close contact protocols with the Leone specimen for approximately 47 minutes yesterday evening. This represents a significant deviation from established safety procedures. The footage showed Sarah sitting cross-legged on the observation deck floor, her hand pressed against the barrier while the beast mirrored her position on the other side. What the security cameras couldn't capture was the subtle communication that had developed between them during those crucial minutes, the way the beast's bioluminescent patterns shifted in response to Sarah's voice, how its massive ears tracked her slightest movements, the gradual relaxation of its posture as tension melted away for the first time since its arrival. Commander Throckval, the station's Valkyrian security chief, leaned forward in his specialized chair. His species' natural aggression made him perpetually suspicious of anything that might threaten station safety. The creature showed increased neural activity during this interaction. Heart rate elevated, muscle tension decreased, and those light patterns became more active. "We cannot determine if this represents positive or negative stimulation." "It represents trust," Sarah interjected, drawing sharp looks from around the table. The beast was responding to social contact for the first time since its capture. Those bioluminescent patterns weren't random. They were following conversational rhythms. Dr. Zixandra, a nautiloid researcher, whose aquatic nature required her to attend meetings via hologram from her water-filled laboratory, rippled her tentacles in what Sarah had learned was skepticism. Keeper Chen, while your success rate with dangerous specimens is notable, this creature represents an entirely unknown species. We lack baseline behavioral data to support your interpretation. Sarah pulled up her own datapad, displaying behavioral charts she had compiled throughout the night. Actually, we do have baseline data. 2 months of it. Look at these patterns. Sleep cycles becoming increasingly irregular, feeding response declining by 12% each week, stress hormones elevated beyond healthy parameters. The beast isn't adapting to captivity. It's slowly dying from isolation. The room fell silent as her colleagues absorbed this information. Many species in the galaxy were social creatures, but few understood the devastating effects of isolation as thoroughly as humans did. Earth's history was filled with examples of highly intelligent animals that withered away when deprived of meaningful social contact. What exactly are you proposing? Dr. Vexon asked, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. Direct contact, Sarah replied simply. Supervised, gradual, and carefully monitored, but actual physical interaction. The beast has shown no aggressive behavior toward me specifically. Its responses suggest curiosity and potential for social bonding. Commander Throckville's growl rumbled through the universal translator. Absolutely not. The creature could kill you in seconds. No weapon we possess has proven effective against its hide, and its speed exceeds our fastest security response times. Which is exactly why traditional approaches have failed, Sarah countered. You're treating the beast like a mindless predator, but everything about its behavior suggests complex intelligence. It destroyed the maintenance robots because they invaded its space without permission. It injured the Valkyrian handlers because they used force during capture. It's not randomly violent. It's defending itself. Dr. Vexon studied the data displays thoughtfully. His species prized logic above emotion, but they also recognized patterns that others might miss. The correlation between isolation duration and behavioral degradation is indeed concerning. However, the risk factors remain extreme. What safeguards could possibly justify such an approach? Sarah had been preparing for this question all night. Gradual habituation through the feeding process. Instead of using drones, I conduct feeding sessions in person from outside the barrier. Let the beast associate my presence with positive experiences. Monitor its stress responses during each interaction. If we see any signs of aggression, we abort immediately. And if the creature decides to test the strength of the habitat barriers, Commander Throckville demanded, those walls were designed to contain it, not to protect someone standing directly beside them. Then we'll know whether we're dealing with a mindless beast or an intelligent being capable of making choices, Sarah replied. Human intuition suggests the latter. The debate continued for another hour, with various department heads raising objections and concerns. The Zephyrian medical staff worried about trauma protocols for humans injured by unknown alien anatomy. The cerebrary psychological specialists questioned the ethics of using a human as a test subject for interspecies communication. The nautiloid researchers expressed concerns about contamination protocols and unknown pathogens. Finally, Dr. Vexon called for a formal vote. All those in favor of authorizing Keeper Chen's proposed direct contact protocols with appropriate safety measures? The result was closer than Sarah had expected. The vote split along species lines, with humans and human-friendly species supporting the proposal, while more cautious civilizations opposed it. Dr. Vexon's deciding vote came after several minutes of silent consideration. Motion approved, with the following conditions. All interactions must be recorded and monitored by at least 3 separate departments. Medical teams must be standing by with full trauma protocols. Security must maintain override capabilities for habitat barriers and emergency response systems. Any sign of aggressive behavior results in immediate termination of the program. As the meeting disbanded, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. She had won permission to attempt something unprecedented in galactic zoological history, but the weight of responsibility was enormous. If something went wrong, it wouldn't just end her career or threaten her life. It would likely result in the beast being transferred to a maximum security facility, where it would never again see anything but steel walls and robotic caretakers. That afternoon, Sarah began her new routine. Instead of allowing the automated systems to deliver the beast's food, She personally carried its meals to the habitat. The creature's diet consisted of specially synthesized proteins that mimicked the nutritional content of its presumed natural prey, based on analysis of its digestive system and metabolic requirements. The first few feeding sessions were tense affairs. Sarah would approach the habitat barrier carrying a large container of the protein chunks, while the beast watched her from whatever corner of its enclosure it had claimed as territory. Initially, it showed little interest in either her or the food, forcing her to leave the container near the barrier and retreat to the observation deck. But on the fourth day, something changed. As Sarah approached with the afternoon meal, the beast rose from its resting position and padded toward the barrier. It stopped just out of reach, yellow eyes fixed on her face rather than the food container. Its bioluminescent patterns flickered in what Sarah was beginning to recognize as a neutral. "Watchful state. Hello again," she said softly, setting the container down and crouching to bring herself closer to the beast's eye level. "Hungry today?" The massive head tilted, ears pricking forward at the sound of her voice. For several heartbeats, they regarded each other across the barrier. Then deliberately, the beast took 2 steps closer. The distance between them narrowed to less than a meter, separated only by the transparent aluminum wall. Sarah's breath caught as she realized the significance of the moment. The beast was choosing to approach her, to trust her enough to come within striking distance of the barrier. Its body language showed no signs of aggression or fear, only careful curiosity. "That's it," she whispered, slowly reaching into the container to retrieve a piece of the synthesized protein. "Want to try something new?" Instead of simply leaving the food near the barrier as usual, Sarah held the chunk in her open palm, extending her arm toward the wall. The beast's nostrils flared as it caught the scent, but its eyes remained locked on Sarah's face. It was reading her intentions, she realized, trying to understand what she wanted from this interaction. After what felt like an eternity, the beast took one final step forward until its massive form pressed against the barrier. Up close, Sarah could see the incredible detail of its alien anatomy. The obsidian black fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The subtle muscular movements beneath its skin as it breathed. The way its bioluminescent mane responded to its emotional state like a living mood ring. With infinite care, the beast extended its neck and gently took the food from Sarah's palm through the barrier's feeding slot. Its movements were so controlled and precise that she barely felt the brush of its lips against her skin. The simple act of feeding had become something unprecedented in galactic zoological history. Genuine cooperation between human and unknown alien predator. 3 weeks into the feeding program, Sarah's relationship with the beast had evolved beyond anything the research team had anticipated. What started as simple food delivery had become elaborate communication sessions that left xenobiologists across the galaxy debating the implications. The beast, whom Sarah had begun privately calling Nyx after the ancient Earth goddess of night, now approached the barrier the moment she entered the habitat corridor. The morning routine had become a carefully choreographed dance of trust. Sarah would arrive carrying not just food, but a collection of objects designed to test Nyx's cognitive abilities. Simple puzzles, textured materials, and even a modified holographic display that could project images through the barrier. Each day brought new revelations about the creature's intelligence and emotional complexity. "Good morning." "Beautiful," Sarah greeted as she approached Habitat 47, carrying a container filled with Nyx's favorite protein variants. The massive alien predator was already waiting by the barrier, its bioluminescent patterns shifting to a warm golden hue that Sarah had learned indicated contentment and anticipation. Dr. Vexon observed from the monitoring station, his large eyes reflecting the data streams flowing across his screens. "Neural activity remains elevated but stable," he announced to the research team. "Stress hormones have decreased to normal baseline levels for the first time since the creature's arrival." What fascinated the observers most was Nyx's apparent understanding of the daily routine. The beast had learned to distinguish between feeding times and other visits, showing different behavioral responses to each. When Sarah arrived with food, Nyx would sit patiently by the barrier, occasionally making soft rumbling sounds that seemed almost conversational. When she came for observation sessions, Nyx would often retrieve objects from around its habitat and bring them to the barrier as if offering gifts. Today's session included a new element that had taken weeks of careful preparation. The habitat's atmospheric systems had been modified to allow Sarah to introduce her own scent into Nyx's environment gradually. It was a technique human-animal behaviorists had used for millennia, helping creatures associate specific individuals with safety and comfort. As Sarah approached the feeding slot, Nyx performed its now familiar greeting ritual. The massive head would lower until those intelligent yellow eyes were level with Sarah's, followed by a gentle huffing sound that vibrated through the barrier. Sarah had begun responding with her own soft vocalizations, creating what appeared to be an actual conversation between species. "I have something special for you today," Sarah said, reaching into her supply pack to retrieve a piece of fabric. It was a section of her own work uniform, worn during several shifts to carry her scent. She held it up for Nyx to see, watching as the creature's nostrils flared with interest. The response was immediate and startling. Nyx's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a complex display of blues and purples that pulsed in rapid sequence. The beast pressed closer to the barrier, its massive form trembling with what could only be described as excitement. When Sarah placed the fabric in the feeding slot, Nyx took it with the same careful precision used for food, but instead of consuming it, the creature carried it to the center of its habitat. "Remarkable," Dr. Vexon murmured, watching as Nyx arranged the fabric on its preferred resting spot. "The creature appears to be creating a nest association with Keeper Chen's scent. This behavior suggests far more sophisticated emotional bonding than we initially theorized." The implications were staggering. If Nyx was truly forming attachment bonds with Sarah, it meant the creature possessed emotional capabilities that rivaled those of Earth's most intelligent species. Dolphins, elephants, and great apes had all demonstrated similar behaviors when forming bonds with human caretakers. But the breakthrough that changed everything came during the afternoon observation session. Sarah was conducting her usual communication exercises, showing Nyx various holographic images to test its recognition and memory capabilities. The beast had already demonstrated the ability to distinguish between geometric shapes, respond to color changes, and even show preferences for certain visual patterns. Today's test involved showing Nyx images of different environments: dense forests, open plains, mountainous regions, and underwater scenes. The creature's responses to most images were mild interest at best. But when the hologram shifted to display a star field, Nyx's reaction was explosive. The massive predator leaped to its feet, bioluminescent patterns blazing with brilliant white light that had never been observed before. Nyx approached the barrier and began vocalizing in a series of complex sounds that ranged from deep rumbles to higher-pitched tones that seemed almost melodic. The creature was clearly trying to communicate something important, but the meaning remained frustratingly unclear. "Increase hologram resolution," Sarah called to the observation team. "Focus on the star pattern. I think Nyx recognizes something specific." As the image sharpened, revealing individual stars and nebulae in greater detail, Nyx's excitement reached fever pitch. The beast began moving in complex patterns around its habitat, occasionally returning to the barrier to vocalize toward the hologram. Its body language suggested urgency, as if it were trying to convey critical information. "Wait." Dr. Zixandra's voice crackled through the communication system from her aquatic laboratory. "That star pattern. Enhance Sector 7 of the display." The hologram zoomed in on a specific region of space, revealing a distinctive cluster of blue giant stars surrounded by unusual nebular formations. The moment this particular view appeared, Nyx fell completely silent. The massive creature pressed against the barrier, its yellow eyes fixed on the display with an intensity that made Sarah's breath catch. "That's the Andromeda Gateway region." Commander Throckval's voice carried a note of recognition. "Where we found the derelict vessel." Understanding crashed over Sarah like a physical blow. Nyx wasn't just recognizing the star pattern. The beast was looking at home. This magnificent creature that had been torn from everything familiar, imprisoned in an alien environment, and subjected to the fear and confusion of captivity, was seeing its birthplace for the first time in months. "Nyx," Sarah whispered, pressing her palm against the barrier. "Is that where you're from?" The creature's response was heartbreaking in its obvious emotional content. Nyx placed its massive paw against the barrier opposite Sarah's hand, just as it had during their first real interaction. But now the gesture carried layers of meaning that neither had possessed weeks ago: trust, recognition, and something that could only be described as desperate hope. The bioluminescent patterns in Nix's mane shifted to a display of soft blues and purples, punctuated by brief flashes of white that seemed to mirror the star patterns in the hologram. Sarah realized with growing excitement that the creature might be trying to show her something specific about its home system. Computer, record all visual and audio data from the creature's responses, Dr. Vexon ordered. Cross-reference bioluminescent patterns with the stellar cartography of the Andromeda Gateway region. As the session continued, a pattern began to emerge. Nix's light displays weren't random emotional responses. They were a form of communication, possibly even a primitive star map. The creature was trying to tell them something about its origins, about the derelict ship, about what had happened to bring it so far from home. "We need to decode this," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "Nix isn't just showing us where it's from. It's trying to tell us a story. And I think that story might explain everything about why its ship was found drifting empty in space." The research team worked through the night, analyzing every pattern, every vocalization, every subtle movement that Nix had made during the Starfield presentation. What they discovered would revolutionize not just their understanding of this remarkable creature, but their entire approach to interspecies communication. Nix wasn't just an alien predator that had been captured and contained. The beast was a survivor, a witness to something that had happened in the depths of space. And it had been waiting for someone with the patience and wisdom to listen to its story. Sarah knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and revelations. The relationship between human and alien had evolved beyond simple animal husbandry into something unprecedented in galactic history. They were on the verge of true interspecies communication, and the implications would ripple through the scientific community like shockwaves through hyperspace. But tonight, as she watched Nix settle into sleep surrounded by the fabric carrying her scent, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction. Trust had been established, communication had begun, and tomorrow they would take the next crucial step in bridging the gap between worlds. The breakthrough came at 0347 hours during what should have been routine overnight monitoring. Sarah had fallen asleep at her desk in the observation lounge, exhausted from 16-hour days spent analyzing Nix's communication patterns. She was awakened by urgent chimes from the habitat's emergency alert system. But when she checked the displays, all readings appeared normal. Nix was awake, which wasn't unusual. The creature had demonstrated nocturnal tendencies that aligned with its presumed predatory nature. What was unusual was the intensity of its bioluminescent display. The beast's entire mane blazed with complex patterns of light that shifted and pulsed with mathematical precision. "Computer, are you recording this?" Sarah asked groggily, pulling up the full sensor array data. "Affirmative. Keeper Chen. Current display pattern does not match any previously recorded behavioral sequences." Sarah watched in growing amazement as Nix's patterns formed distinct geometric shapes that held for several seconds before transitioning to new configurations. Triangles became spirals, which evolved into interconnected networks that resembled molecular structures. The display was too complex and purposeful to be coincidental. "Nix is trying to teach me something," she whispered, reaching for her communication equipment. "Computer, connect me to Dr. Vexon's quarters." The cerebrary scientist's holographic image materialized within minutes, his large eyes immediately focusing on the habitat displays. "Extraordinary. The mathematical progression suggests advanced cognitive mapping. The creature is presenting information in a sequential, educational format." Over the next several hours, Nix continued its luminous lecture, creating increasingly complex patterns that seemed to build upon previous concepts. Sarah and Dr. Vexon worked frantically to record and analyze each sequence, gradually recognizing what appeared to be a primitive form of pictographic communication. "It's telling us about its species," Sarah realized as the pattern shifted to show multiple smaller lights surrounding larger ones. "Look at this sequence. That's a family group, parents and offspring." The implications were staggering. If Nix was indeed demonstrating family structures, it meant the creature possessed not just intelligence but also social awareness and emotional connections to its own kind. The beast wasn't just a predator, it was a person, with relationships and memories and possibly even cultural knowledge. As dawn approached, Nix's display began to change focus. The family groupings were replaced by images that Sarah gradually recognized as spacecraft and stellar navigation patterns. The creature was showing them the journey that had brought it to this place. The voyage that had ended with its capture near the Andromeda Gateway. Computer, overlay current stellar cartography data with the creature's light patterns, Dr. Vexon ordered. The comparison revealed disturbing correlations. Nyx's patterns matched known hyperspace routes through the galaxy's outer rim, but they also showed deviations and interruptions that suggested something had gone wrong during the journey. The story being told in bioluminescent light was one of a voyage interrupted, a mission that had failed catastrophically. The derelict ship, Sarah breathed. Nyx wasn't the only one aboard. There were others of its kind. The realization hit them both simultaneously. The empty vessel found drifting near the Andromeda Gateway hadn't been abandoned. It had been the scene of a tragedy that left Nyx as the sole survivor of its species' expedition into galactic space. When the morning shift arrived, they found Sarah and Dr. Vexon surrounded by holographic displays showing complex mathematical models and star charts. Both researchers looked exhausted, but exhilarated by their discoveries. "We need to establish formal communication protocols immediately," Dr. Vexon announced to the assembled staff. "The creature has demonstrated clear sapience and cultural awareness. Our entire approach must be reconsidered." Commander Throckval's expression remained skeptical. Light patterns and presumed intelligence are insufficient basis for major policy changes. The creature remains dangerous regardless of its cognitive capabilities. "Dangerous, yes," Sarah agreed. "But not hostile." "There's a critical difference. Nyx has had dozens of opportunities to test the habitat barriers or show aggression. Instead, it's been trying to communicate with us, to teach us about itself and its people." The debate that followed was intense and sometimes heated. The implications of acknowledging Nyx as a sapient being rather than simply an exotic animal were enormous. Protocols would need to be established for interspecies diplomatic contact. Legal frameworks for sapient rights would need to be developed. The entire foundation of galactic zoological science would require fundamental revision. But the most immediate challenge was practical. If Nyx was indeed a sapient being, then its current confinement bordered on imprisonment without trial. The creature had committed no crimes and posed no direct threat to station security. Yet it remained trapped in an artificial environment far from its homeworld. "I propose direct contact," Sarah announced, causing a ripple of alarm through the assembled staff. Not as keeper to animal, but as representative of one species meeting with another. "We've established trust and basic communication. It's time to take the next step." Dr. Vexon nodded slowly. The precedent would be unprecedented in galactic history. First contact protocols exist for space-based encounters, but nothing covers this situation. A sapient being already in custody, already partially integrated into our social structure. "The risks remain extreme," Commander Throckval warned. "Regardless of intelligence level, the creature possesses physical capabilities that exceed our safety parameters. One mistake could result in fatalities." Sarah stood up, facing the assembled team with quiet determination. "Then we don't make mistakes. We approach this with the same careful preparation we'd use for any first contact scenario. Full diplomatic protocols, safety measures, and most importantly, respect for Nyx as an individual rather than a specimen." The vote that followed was even more contentious than the previous authorization. Several department heads argued for maintaining current protocols while gathering more data about Nyx's communication abilities. Others supported gradual expansion of interaction opportunities within existing safety frameworks. In the end, it was Nyx itself that forced the decision. During the afternoon session, as Sarah conducted her usual feeding routine, the creature performed an action that left no doubt about its intentions. Instead of simply taking food from the feeding slot, Nyx carefully placed a claw through the opening and touched Sarah's hand. The contact lasted only seconds, but its significance was profound. The gesture was gentle, deliberate, and entirely trusting. Nyx had chosen to make physical contact with Sarah despite being fully capable of causing serious injury. It was a demonstration of intent that no one could misinterpret. "The creature has made its position clear," Dr. Vexon observed as he reviewed the recorded interaction. "It seeks expanded contact and is willing to demonstrate peaceful intentions." That evening, Sarah found herself alone with Nyx for the first extended direct contact session. The habitat barriers remained in place, but she was authorized to interact through the feeding slots and communication ports. What she discovered during those crucial hours would reshape everything the galactic community, thought they knew about intelligence, communication, and the nature of consciousness itself. "Hello, Nix," she said softly, settling into her now familiar position beside the barrier. "I know you understand more than we realized. I know you're trying to tell us about your people, about what happened to them." The massive creature approached the barrier with its usual careful grace, but this time its bioluminescent patterns were different. Instead of the complex mathematical displays of the previous night, Nix's mane glowed with soft, warm colors that pulsed in rhythm with Sarah's heartbeat. The creature was reading her emotional state, Sarah realized with amazement. Nix could somehow sense human physiological responses and was responding with empathy. The bond between them had evolved beyond simple trust into something approaching genuine friendship. "We want to help you," Sarah continued, reaching through the communication port to extend her hand toward Nix. "But we need to understand what happened to your ship, to your people. Can you show us?" Nix's response was immediate and deeply moving. The creature gently pressed its massive head against the barrier near Sarah's hand, its bioluminescent patterns shifting to display what could only be described as profound sadness. The loss of its species expedition wasn't just a tragedy that had happened to others. It was a personal wound that Nix carried with the weight of survivor's guilt. Over the following hours, through a combination of light patterns, vocalizations, and careful gestures, Nix began to tell the story of what had really happened aboard the derelict vessel. It was a tale of exploration and discovery that had turned into nightmare, of a peaceful mission that had encountered something dark and hostile in the depths of space. And as Sarah listened to the story unfolding in alien light and sound, she began to understand that Nix's arrival at the Galactic Zoological Reserve hadn't been coincidence. The creature hadn't just been captured near the Andromeda Gateway. It had been fleeing from something. The story Nix told through bioluminescent patterns and careful gestures was darker than anyone had imagined. As Sarah sat transfixed by the alien's communication, she began to piece together a narrative of terror that had unfolded in the cold depths of space near the Andromeda Gateway. Nix's people, the Umbraxi, had been explorers and researchers, not warriors. Their ship, the Stellar Harmony, had been equipped for scientific investigation rather than combat. The expedition consisted of 12 individuals, including Nix, who had served as the mission's primary scout and protector. Their goal had been simple: investigate unusual energy readings emanating from an uncharted system near the galactic boundary. The patterns of light dancing across Nix's mane painted pictures of peaceful cooperation and shared purpose. The Umbraxi had been a harmonious species, working together with the kind of seamless coordination that came from millions of years of evolutionary social bonding. Sarah could see the love and respect Nix held for its lost companions in the gentle way the creature's patterns softened when depicting them. But then the story took a horrific turn. The energy readings they had come to investigate weren't natural phenomena. They were the signatures of something ancient and malevolent that had been waiting in the darkness between stars. The Umbraxi had discovered too late that they were not explorers making first contact, but prey being hunted by something that fed on consciousness itself. "The Devourers," Sarah whispered as she began to understand the implications of Nix's increasingly agitated display patterns. The creature's bioluminescence had shifted to harsh reds and stark whites that pulsed with obvious distress, something that kills by consuming minds. Dr. Vexon, who had been monitoring the session from the observation deck, leaned forward with intense interest. "Ask the creature to elaborate on the nature of these entities. If they represent a threat to galactic security, we need more information." Sarah approached the barrier more closely, placing both hands against the transparent aluminum wall. "Nix, these Devourers, are they still out there? Are they following you?" The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Nix's entire body began trembling as its bioluminescent patterns exploded into chaotic displays of fear and warning. The massive creature backed away from the barrier, vocalizing in low, mournful tones that seemed to carry the weight of profound loss and desperate urgency. "They're coming," Sarah realized with growing horror. "That's what Nix has been trying to tell us. The Devourers didn't just destroy the Umbraxi expedition. They're pursuing the survivors. They're hunting Nix." The implications sent shockwaves through the research team. If hostile entities were indeed tracking Nix to their location, the entire station could be in danger. The Galactic Zoological Reserve housed thousands of researchers and support staff from dozens of species. It was a peaceful scientific installation with minimal defensive capabilities. Commander Throckvall's voice crackled through the communication system with military urgency. All departments report to emergency stations. Initiate long-range sensor sweeps of surrounding space. If hostile entities are approaching our position, we need advance warning. But even as the station shifted into defensive mode, Sarah remained focused on Nyx. The creature's distress was palpable, and she realized that her earlier questions had triggered traumatic memories of watching its companions die one by one as the devourers consumed their consciousness. "I'm sorry," she said softly, pressing her face close to the barrier. "I didn't mean to cause you pain. We need to understand so we can protect everyone here, including you." Nyx's response showed the depth of trust that had developed between them. Despite its obvious distress, the creature approached the barrier again, its pattern shifting to display what Sarah was learning to recognize as determination and protective instinct. Nyx wasn't just afraid for itself. The alien was terrified that the same fate that had befallen its people would destroy the researchers who had shown it kindness. Over the next several hours, working through careful questioning and patient interpretation, Sarah and the research team assembled a picture of the devourers that challenged everything they thought they knew about threats in their galaxy. These weren't physical beings that could be fought with conventional weapons. They were entities of pure consciousness that existed in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the life force and memories of sapient species. The Umbraxi had encountered them at the edge of known space, where the barriers between dimensions were naturally thin. The attack had been swift and merciless. One by one, Nyx's companions had simply stopped. Their bodies remained intact, but their consciousness had been drained away, leaving empty shells that gradually shut down as their autonomic functions failed. "How did you survive?" Sarah asked, watching Nyx's patterns carefully for the answer. The response was complex and deeply personal. Nyx displayed patterns showing itself in a state of hibernation or stasis during the attack. As the ship's primary scout, it had been resting in a specially shielded compartment designed to mask life signs from potential threats. The very isolation that had been intended to protect Nyx during dangerous reconnaissance missions had saved it from the consciousness-devouring entities. But survival had come at a terrible cost. Nyx had awakened to find its entire crew dead, and the ship drifting powerless through space. Worse, the creature had detected signs that the devourers were still present, still hunting, still following the energy trail that led from their feeding ground to wherever the stellar harmony might drift. That's why the ship was found empty, Dr. Vexon murmured as he processed the implications. The creature was hiding, waiting for the hunters to move on before revealing itself. Sarah felt a chill as another piece of the puzzle fell into place. But they didn't move on, did they, Nyx? They're still following the trail, still hunting. The creature's affirmative response was unmistakable. Its bioluminescent patterns painted a picture of relentless pursuit across the void, of ancient predators that had locked onto the scent of their prey and would not abandon the hunt until every trace of the Umbraxi expedition had been consumed. Emergency klaxons began sounding throughout the station as long-range sensors detected anomalous readings, approaching from the direction of the Andromeda Gateway. The readings were unlike anything in the galactic databases, energy signatures that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. "Contact in approximately 18 hours, Commander Throckvall announced over the station-wide communication system. "All non-essential personnel report to evacuation stations. Combat teams prepare for possible hostile contact." Sarah looked at Nyx through the barrier, seeing her own fear reflected in those intelligent alien eyes. The creature had spent months in isolation, carrying the weight of its people's destruction and the terror of knowing that the killers were still hunting. Now, despite every precaution, the devourers had found them. "We won't let them take you," she promised, pressing her palm against the barrier one more time. "And we won't let them destroy anyone else." Nyx's response was a complex display of gratitude, determination, and something that looked remarkably like hope. The alien had been alone for so long, fighting a solitary battle against cosmic horror, but now it had allies. It had found a species willing to stand beside it against the darkness. The next few hours would test everything that humans and their galactic allies had learned about cooperation, courage, and the bonds that could form between vastly different forms of life. The devourers were coming, bringing with them the kind of existential threat that had destroyed entire civilizations. But they had never faced humanity before. They had never encountered a species that responded to impossible odds with stubborn determination rather than despair, and they had certainly never faced humans who had formed an emotional bond with someone they were determined to protect. As the station prepared for battle, Sarah remained with Nix, both of them knowing that the real test of their interspecies friendship was about to begin. The creature's bioluminescent patterns had settled into steady, confident displays that seemed to say, "Together, we stand. Together we fight. Together we survive." The Devourers might have consumed the consciousness of an entire Umbraxi expedition, but they were about to discover that some bonds transcend species, and some forms of determination are stronger than hunger itself. The attack began 16 hours ahead of schedule, catching the station's defensive preparations incomplete. Sarah was conducting an emergency session with Nix, trying to gather any additional tactical information about the Devourers, when reality itself seemed to ripple around Habitat 47. The first sign wasn't visible or audible. It was a wrongness that seemed to press against the mind like cold fingers reaching through the barriers between dimensions. Several Zephyrian researchers collapsed immediately, their crystalline nervous systems too sensitive to withstand the psychic pressure. Emergency medical teams rushed to assist them, while station-wide alerts blared warnings of an unknown type of hostile contact. "Sarah, get away from there immediately," Commander Throckval's voice barked through the communication system. "We're detecting massive psychic disturbances centered on your location." But Sarah couldn't leave. Nix had gone rigid with terror, its bioluminescent patterns blazing with desperate warnings as the creature detected the approach of its people's killers. The alien was experiencing the same traumatic memories that had haunted it for months, but now the threat was real and immediate. "I'm not abandoning you," Sarah said firmly, pressing both hands against the barrier. "We're in this together, remember?" The habitat's emergency systems activated as sensors detected dimensional anomalies forming throughout the facility. What materialized wasn't the physical ships or creatures that conventional defenses were designed to repel. Instead, patches of space simply became wrong, twisting into configurations that hurt to look at directly. From these tiers in reality emerged the Devourers. They appeared as shifting shadows with substance, darkness given form and malevolent intelligence. Their presence created feedback loops in the station's neural monitoring systems, causing displays to flicker with impossible readings that suggested consciousness was being actively drained from the surrounding area. Nix's reaction was immediate and desperate. The massive creature threw itself against the habitat barriers with enough force to send shock waves through the station's superstructure. Its bioluminescent patterns had become strobing warnings of danger so intense they triggered seizure protocols in several observation systems. "The barriers won't hold it," Dr. Vexon announced from the emergency command center. "The creature's panic response is exceeding containment parameters. Structural integrity is failing." Sarah realized with crystal clarity what was happening. Nix wasn't trying to escape from the habitat. The alien was trying to reach her, to place itself between Sarah and the approaching Devourers. Despite months of captivity and the trauma of losing its entire species, Nix's primary concern was protecting the human who had shown it kindness. "Open the barriers," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that came from complete certainty. "Absolutely not," Commander Throckval responded. "Release of the creature during a hostile contact scenario violates every safety protocol in our database." "Then write new protocols," Sarah shot back. "Nix isn't the threat here. The Devourers are, and Nix is the only one who knows how to fight them." The debate might have continued, but the Devourers made the decision for them. One of the shadow entities flowed through the station's corridors like living darkness, passing through bulkheads and security doors, as if they were mere suggestions. It entered the habitat observation area, just as Sarah was arguing for Nix's release. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Sarah felt something essential being pulled from her mind, memories and thoughts being drawn away like water through a drain. She could see her childhood on Earth, her years of training, her growing bond with Nix, all of it being consumed by something that fed on consciousness itself. But then Nix roared. The sound was unlike anything the creature had produced before. It wasn't the gentle rumbles of communication, or even the warning growls of distress. This was a battle cry that seemed to shake the dimensional barriers themselves. a sound filled with rage and protective fury that came from the very core of the alien's being. The Devourer's attack faltered as Nyx's roar created some kind of psychic interference. Sarah felt the draining sensation stop, her memories snapping back into focus with painful clarity. She looked up to see Nyx pressed against the habitat barrier, its entire body blazing with bioluminescent patterns so bright they overwhelmed the observation deck's visual systems. The creature is generating some form of psychic defense, Dr. Vexon announced over the communication system. Its neural output is creating interference with the hostile entity's feeding mechanism. Understanding crashed over Sarah like a revelation. Nyx hadn't survived the attack on its ship through luck or hiding. The creature possessed some form of natural resistance to the Devourer's consciousness-draining abilities. Its people's destruction hadn't been complete defeat. It had been a desperate last stand that had given one survivor the knowledge and capability to fight back. "Release the barriers now," Sarah commanded. "Nyx is our best defense against these things." This time, Commander Throckval didn't argue. The habitat's containment systems disengaged with a series of metallic clicks and pneumatic hisses. The transparent aluminum barriers retracted into their housing units, leaving nothing between Sarah and 8 meters of alien predator except trust and mutual understanding. Nyx flowed from its habitat with liquid grace, its massive form moving with purpose and deadly intent. But instead of attacking Sarah or fleeing toward the station's exit, the creature positioned itself protectively between her and the Devourer that was still attempting to drain consciousness. From the observation deck, the battle that followed defied every conventional understanding of combat. Nyx's bioluminescent patterns became weapons, blazing with specific frequencies that seemed to cause the shadow entity actual pain. The creature's roars created sonic barriers that disrupted the Devourer's dimensional stability, forcing it back toward the tiers in reality from which it had emerged. "Remarkable," Dr. Vexon whispered as he monitored the engagement. "The creature's natural defenses are specifically adapted to combat these entities. Its entire species must have evolved in an environment where such threats were present." Sarah watched in amazement as Nyx fought with the precision of a trained warrior and the desperation of someone protecting everything they held dear. The alien's movements were calculated and purposeful, each bioluminescent burst timed to coincide with the Devourer's attempts to solidify its form in normal space. But the battle was taking its toll. Nyx's patterns were becoming less coordinated, its roars losing some of their dimensional disrupting power. The creature was fighting not just one Devourer but the psychic echoes of the entities that had destroyed its people. Each defensive move carried the weight of survivors' guilt and the desperate need to prevent another massacre. "It's weakening," Sarah realized, watching Nyx's bioluminescence begin to flicker. The strain of maintaining those defenses is exhausting it. Without conscious thought, Sarah stepped forward and placed her hand on Nyx's flank. The contact was electric, not just in the literal sense of the creature's bioluminescent energy, but in the emotional connection that flowed between them. Sarah felt Nyx's determination, its pain, its fierce protective instincts, and something else: hope. The moment their connection solidified, something extraordinary happened. Sarah's own neural patterns began synchronizing with Nyx's defensive frequencies. Her human consciousness, apparently more resilient to the Devourer's attacks than expected, began amplifying and stabilizing the alien's psychic defenses. "Impossible," Dr. Vexon breathed as his sensors registered the phenomenon. "Human neural patterns are creating harmonic resonance with the creature's defensive capabilities. They're functioning as a unified psychic entity." The Devourer's attack intensified as it sensed the threat this new combination represented. But Nyx and Sarah, working together with the kind of perfect coordination that came from absolute trust, proved more than equal to the challenge. The alien's bioluminescent weapons became more focused, more devastating, while Sarah's human determination provided the emotional anchor that kept both of them grounded in reality. Together, they drove the shadow entity back through the dimensional tear from which it had emerged. But even as they celebrated this victory, alarms throughout the station indicated that the battle was far from over. The Devourers had attacked multiple locations simultaneously, and other defenders were not faring as well. "We need to help the others," Sarah said, looking up at Nyx's magnificent form. "Can you teach them what you've taught me?" The creature's response was a complex display of patterns that somehow conveyed both determination and affection. Nyx was ready to fight, ready to protect not just Sarah but every being on the station who had the courage to stand against the darkness. As they prepared to venture into the station's corridors together, Sarah realized that something unprecedented had occurred. Human and alien had not just formed a bond of friendship or mutual protection. They had created a new form of consciousness, a hybrid entity that combined the best qualities of both species into something capable of standing against cosmic horror itself. The Devourers had destroyed the Umbraxi expedition because they had encountered a species that... The corridors of the Galactic Zoological Reserve had become a battleground between dimensions. Sarah and Nyx moved through the chaos like a force of nature, their psychic bond creating a protective field that the Devourers could not penetrate. Where other defenders had been overwhelmed by the consciousness-draining attacks, the human-alien partnership carved through shadow entities with devastating effectiveness. Their first rescue came in the xenobiology laboratories, where Dr. Zixandra and her aquatic research team had been trapped by 3 Devourers. The shadow entities had surrounded the nautiloid scientists, slowly draining their complex neural networks while feeding on their accumulated knowledge and memories. "Stay behind us," Sarah called to the trapped researchers as Nyx's bioluminescent patterns blazed to life. The aliens' defensive frequencies had evolved during their journey through the station, becoming more sophisticated as it learned to adapt its natural abilities to the station's technological environment. The battle was swift but intense. Nyx's consciousness-disrupting roars echoed through the laboratory, while its light weapons carved through the Devourers' dimensional forms. Sarah's role had evolved from simple amplification to active participation, her human intuition guiding their combined attacks toward the entity's weak points in the fabric of reality. "How are you doing this?" Dr. Zixandra gasped as the last Devourer dissipated back into whatever nightmare dimension had spawned them. "Our conventional weapons had no effect whatsoever." "Partnership," Sarah replied simply, running her hand along Nyx's flank as the creature's patterns shifted to warm, satisfied colors. Nyx's people evolved defenses against these things, but they were still fighting alone. Humans are good at working together, at amplifying each other's strengths. Put the two approaches together, and you create something greater than the sum of its parts. Dr. Vexon's voice crackled through the communication system. "Sarah, we're tracking your progress through the station. Your success rate is 100%, while conventional defensive teams are experiencing 70% casualties." The numbers were sobering but not surprising. The Devourers represented a form of warfare that conventional military thinking couldn't address. They attacked the very essence of consciousness, turning sapient beings' greatest strength, their intelligence, into a vulnerability that could be exploited. But humans had always been adaptation specialists, capable of finding solutions to problems that should have been impossible to solve, and Nyx represented the accumulated wisdom of a species that had faced this exact threat and developed countermeasures. Through millions of years of evolution, their next destination was the Central Command Center, where Commander Throckval and his security team had barricaded themselves behind emergency barriers. The Velkarian commander's natural aggression had proven useless against enemies that couldn't be intimidated or physically damaged by conventional weapons. "Keeper Chen, we've lost contact with the outer stations," Throckval reported as Sarah and Nyx entered the command center. "The entities are systematically draining consciousness from every sapient being they encounter. Evacuation protocols have failed because the Devourers can apparently track neural activity across significant distances." Sarah studied the tactical displays, seeing the spreading pattern of incursions throughout the station. The attack wasn't random. The Devourers were following specific routes that suggested they were hunting for something particular. "They're looking for Nyx," she realized. "This whole attack is designed to flush out the survivor from the Umbraxi expedition. Everything else is just feeding along the way." The implications were staggering. The Devourers had tracked Nyx across interstellar distances, infiltrated one of the galaxy's most secure research facilities, and were willing to consume thousands of innocent lives just to eliminate the last witness to their previous massacre. "Then we give them what they want," Sarah said, her voice carrying a determination that made even the battle-hardened Velkarian commander step back. "We draw them to us on our terms in a place where we can use Nyx's abilities most effectively." "That's suicide," Dr. Vexon protested. Concentrating all the hostile entities in one location will create a psychic maelstrom that could tear apart the station's dimensional stability. Not if we're ready for them, Sarah replied, looking up at Nyx. The massive alien's patterns were shifting through complex sequences that somehow conveyed both agreement and strategic planning. Nyx has been trying to tell me something about its people's final battle. They didn't just hide from the Devourers, they found a way to fight back. Through careful communication, Sarah began to understand the true scope of what the Umbraxi had accomplished in their final moments. Faced with the complete destruction of their expedition, they had linked their consciousness together in a desperate gambit. Instead of being consumed individually, they had merged their psychic defenses into a weapon capable of damaging the Devourers themselves. The strategy had partially succeeded. Several of the consciousness predators had been destroyed or severely weakened, but the effort had cost the Umbraxi their lives, leaving only Nyx to carry the knowledge of how such a defense could be constructed. "We need volunteers," Sarah announced to the command center. "Every sapient being willing to risk their consciousness in a coordinated psychic defense. Nyx can guide the process, but it requires multiple participants to create the kind of resonance field that can actually harm these entities." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Despite the terrifying nature of the threat, representatives from every species on the station stepped forward. Zephyrians with their crystalline neural networks, nautiloids with their complex aquatic consciousness, Cerebrari with their enhanced intellectual capabilities, Felcarians with their fierce warrior determination, and humans with their stubborn refusal to accept impossible odds. "The Biodiversity Laboratory," Commander Throckval suggested. "It's the largest open space on the station, with redundant power systems and dimensional stabilizers. If we're going to make a stand, that's our best option." The journey to the laboratory became a running battle through corridors filled with shadow and terror. The Devourers had recognized the threat that Sarah and Nyx represented and were converging on their location with increasing desperation. But the human-alien partnership had evolved beyond mere cooperation into something approaching telepathic unity. Sarah could feel Nyx's thoughts and emotions as clearly as her own. The alien's memories of its lost people no longer carried only grief, but also determination to ensure their sacrifice had meaning. In return, Nyx experienced human concepts of hope and defiance that were foreign to its species, but perfectly suited to their current situation. By the time they reached the Biodiversity Laboratory, their small group had grown into a multi-species task force unified by shared purpose and mutual trust. The laboratory's vast space had been hastily reconfigured into a defensive position, with power conduits rerouted to support the kind of massive neural amplification that their strategy would require. "Remember," Sarah announced as they took their positions, "we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every species that might encounter these things in the future. Every civilization that could be destroyed the way the Umbraxi were." Nyx took its position at the center of the formation, its bioluminescent patterns already beginning the complex sequences that would link their consciousness together. Sarah placed herself beside the massive alien, her hand resting on its flank to maintain the psychic connection that had made everything possible. Around them, the volunteers from dozens of species prepared to risk everything in a gambit that had never been attempted in galactic history. They were about to create the first truly multi-species consciousness, a hybrid entity that combined the unique strengths of every sapient civilization in their corner of the galaxy. The Devourers came like a tide of living darkness, pouring through every entrance to the laboratory with the hungry desperation of predators who sensed their prey was about to escape. But what they found wasn't frightened victims waiting to be consumed. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented in their eons of feeding across the cosmos. A unified consciousness that spanned species barriers, amplified by human determination, guided by Umbraxi wisdom, and strengthened by the diverse perspectives of a dozen different forms of sapient life. The battle that followed wasn't just a fight for survival. It was the birth of a new form of cooperation that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what was possible when different species chose to work together rather than simply coexist. As Nyx's roar echoed through dimensions and Sarah's human defiance blazed like a beacon across psychic space, the Devourers discovered something they had never encountered in their eons of hunting. They had found prey that had become predators, consciousness that had learned to consume those who fed on consciousness, The hunters had become the hunted, and the age of the devourers was ending in the brilliant light of interspecies unity and the stubborn human refusal to surrender in the face of cosmic horror. When the last shadow entity dissipated back into whatever nightmare realm had spawned them, Sarah and Nick stood together in the center of a laboratory filled with exhausted but triumphant survivors.